Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you guys have been having fun for the event. I've been having fun here as well. And then today I'll be talking about Web3 and Flutter. So Flutter is currently regarded as the world's most popular cross-platform framework. So that means that Flutter is used by a large amount of companies and developers to develop their applications. Now, this is actually a lot more impressive when you realize that Flutter was released in 2017. So just something that Google team used as a play kit in 2017 has now risen up to be the world's most popular cross-platform framework in the entire world. That's amazing. Today, I'm going to share with you my experience developing with the world's most popular cross-platform framework. And I'm also going to share why I believe is the most ideal platform to develop decentralized applications, or dApps. So, a little about me. I'm a Flutter developer. I've been developing for a couple of years. I've launched a couple of applications. I'm also a UI designer. I design a lot of UI applications as well. And currently, I've been experimenting increasingly with Web3 technologies. So Ethereum, Solidity, and all that. I was also a finalist at Airbus Fly Your Ideas, which they term as the Olympics of aviation. I proposed an auto-tassing system for Airbus's future aircrafts. Yeah. So to really understand Web3 and how it integrates with Flutter, we need a bit of context, right? So that's why I'm going to just go through some of the early beginnings of the internet, that's Web1 and Web2, just so that you can have a bit of context when we eventually get to the decentralized Web3. Web1, how was the internet in the Web1 era? Essentially, Web1 was like a magazine, right? It was like a very huge dictionary. So it had you can imagine it as it having a stream of information, right? So a lot of information was posted in the dictionary, right? And so what that means is that essentially the dictionary is kind of just copied and pasted on the internet. Right? So you could search for the internet, you could search for the data that you were looking to find, and you could see it. So some of the characteristics of Web1, we have that it was stateless. Essentially, it didn't have state. So there was no way you could store data, right? It was decentralized, fundamentally, right? And what that means is that the data that people could use or people wanted to search for was decentralized. It was stored on different kind of computers located all around the world, right? It was open protocol based. A lot of the protocols that Web2 companies built on were kind of invented in Web1. So we have a few protocols like the SMS protocol, the web protocol, and the video chat protocol, right? There was no interactivity, so you couldn't like, you couldn't subscribe, you couldn't retweet, you couldn't do all that. It was read-only. You could only consume internet. You could only consume information from the internet, and that's all. You couldn't post anything to the internet. Just completely read-only, right? So there were only a handful of people who could actually deploy to the Web1-based internet, and of course, it was open source. So they invited everybody to contribute to Web1 at the time. So a couple of entrepreneurs, which we all know today, looked at the deficiencies of the Web1 internet. It didn't have states, it didn't have interactivity, you couldn't interact with the internet, you could only see the information that was there, right? They capitalized on those deficiencies and produced these billion-dollar companies that we know today. And this was the start of the Web 2.0. So what were some of the things that Web 2.0 had that Web 1.0 did not have? Web 2.0 introduced interactivity. So all the things like liking, retweeting, subscribing, now you could interact with the internet. When you visit a site, your data is stored, right? These were the kind of things that were introduced in Web 2.0. It was founded on 3 levels: mobile, social, and cloud. With mobile, it allowed the internet users to essentially have an always-on connected state. So you were always connected to the internet in Web 2. That actually helped to propel Web 2 into perpetual ubiquity. Social. So you had a bunch of social dynamics, right, in the real world. And it's this social dynamics that the entrepreneurs of Web 2.0 essentially copied and pasted. That helped a lot of people get closer or feel closer on the internet, something that has never been done before. And then cloud. Cloud enabled users or entrepreneurs in Web 2.0 to actually build the next generation of applications at a low cost. Of course, it captured users' data. That was why the web was actually as interactive as it was. And by default, what that means is that the web ended up becoming centralized. So all the data that users had, in order to provide a certain amount of customization and interactivity to the internet at the time, you needed to store a huge amount of data, right? So why did the internet end up becoming centralized? The internet ended up becoming centralized because the decentralized building blocks that were formed in Web 1 did not exist anymore, right? They could not store state. They could not store users' data. So that's why you have something like Facebook, for example. They stored large amounts of users' data, right? And by storing large amounts of user data, that's essentially what made it become centralized. There are many disadvantages of it being centralized, right? One of which is that the value you create on these platforms can, like the platforms actually capture that value. You are not the one that captures the value, right? So, to the interesting part, Web 3. So what is Web 3 actually? Well, the thing is, Web3 actually has no universal definition. Web3 is just a term, right, that was coined by some dude on the internet. Web3 just refers to the decentralized technologies, right, of digital products and services. Essentially, that's what Web3 is. Next slide, please. So Web3 is an internet that is owned by the users and the people who actually build the internet, right? The previous example I explained about Facebook capturing your data, and then you can't really do all that. Because if you think about it very well, a lot of people grow their businesses on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, and they grow to 10 million plus following. And they create a lot of value because a lot of people go to Instagram to actually view their content. But at the end of the day, they don't capture any of that value. Instagram does not pay these people that create this thing, right? And at the end of the day, they are left with nothing, right? So in Web3, everybody can have a piece of the internet. If Instagram was a Web3 company, everybody could have a piece of Instagram, both the people who use it and the people who build Instagram. So in order to understand how Web3 happens, right, we need to just take a quick look at the underlying technology, which is blockchain. So what is the blockchain? The ETH Foundation defines blockchain as a public database that is updated and shared across many computers in the network. So essentially, you have a database, right, which different computers in a network have the same copy of that database. And it is distributed throughout the whole network, right? But if you're not really or if you're still confused by what blockchain actually is, right, then let's just take a deeper dive into how blockchain actually works. So block actually means data. Essentially, that's what block means. And chain means that the data is securely linked together, right? So if you combine block and chain together, you have blockchain, which is data that is securely linked together. So that data that is securely linked together is duplicated across all the computers in the network, right? Now, what makes blockchain so secure? If you look at these blocks that are drawn here, for example, if you wanted to add block B to block C, right? You notice that there's an arrow going backwards that's linking block B, that's linking block C to block B, right? Essentially, what happens is that some information from block C is mixed with information from block A. They are mixed together, right, to produce a unique ID, sort of a unique ID, right? That unique ID is imprinted onto block B. And that unique ID is actually what is called the cryptographic link. So that unique ID is what makes blockchain so secure. If you take another block A, for example, and you want to add it to block B, right? You take information from block E and data from block A, mix them together, it's going to generate a unique ID. That ID is called the cryptographic link. That's what makes blockchain so secure, right? So, for example, if you feel that, okay, you actually want to, or we can actually say, okay, who now adds these blocks to the blockchain, right? Because everybody can't actually be adding blocks to the blockchain. So who actually adds these blocks to the blockchain? The people that add the blocks to the blockchain are miners. You might have heard of miners before. So these miners are the ones that add these blocks. And in order to add, or to allow them to add the blocks to the blockchain, you essentially pay them what we call a gas fee. So that's the origin of gas fees and the blockchain. So the blockchain is extremely secure. If you try to change a value in block A, for example, it means that you have essentially altered the unique ID, and that ID has kind of a snowball effect. It's going to affect block B, it's going to affect block C, and all the further blocks down the line. And when it affects all the blocks further down the line, when the person that is in charge of that database tries to deploy it to the greater network, right, everybody rejects it because they are not the same thing. Essentially, they already know that the data was altered. So that's one of the benefits of blockchain. Because at the end of the day, you realize that even if the first computer or a particular computer is compromised, the rest of the network is still functioning. So that's actually what makes blockchain very secure. So one blockchain I'm really excited about is Ethereum. Ethereum was basically the first blockchain to offer what we call smart contracts. Smart contracts are essentially code that is deployed to the blockchain, right? So Bitcoin was the first, or introduced the first blockchain. Essentially, you could just move currency around. But blockchain, Ethereum, actually built on top of that foundation and made it possible to deploy code to the blockchain. What that means is that what the possibility that offers is that you can now make any kind of application you feel you want to make. And that's just incredible. Right. So smart contracts, which is code that's deployed to the blockchain, is actually responsible for the development of decentralized applications. If you've heard dApps before, smart contracts essentially are what allow the development of decentralized applications. Now, a number of you might have heard NFTs. You might have heard a lot of information about NFTs, and a lot of people getting ridiculously rich off NFTs and things like that. So what's an NFT? An NFT essentially stands for non-fungible token. And that means that you can actually, it's just a way, right, to assign ownership to a digital piece of asset. A digital or a physical piece of asset. That's it. So essentially, only one person can ever own an NFT. Once you deploy or once you mint an NFT, only one person can own an NFT. No two people can own an NFT. And as you can imagine, there are different sort of applications that you can do with NFTs. For example, a lot of artists today use it to make a whole lot of money. In the future, we're going to have things like singers, artists who actually sing songs, photographers, and a whole lot of people can actually make a lot of get a lot of value from NFTs. So Ethereum smart contracts are written in Solidity. If you are a Flutter developer, you don't really have problems. Solidity is a very similar language to Dart. It is strongly typed, so you won't really have problem getting familiar with Solidity. So now, when I talked about the blockchain, I said blockchain is like basically a backend for your applications, right? How do we now build the front end of an application? Because to build a full application, right, you need a backend and you need a front end. So what technology are we going to use to build the front end? Ideally, we need a technology that is sort of, decentralized in the front end as well. You don't want something that is limited to a particular platform. You don't want to have a decentralized application that is only available on the web or on Android or on iOS. You want something you can deploy everywhere, something you can use on Android, on iOS, in your car, when you travel, in your aircraft, And with all the technologies that are available, we are not going to choose React Native. We are going to choose Flutter. And I'm going to explain in a minute. I know some React JavaScript devs right now are squeezing their face, but no problem. So why did I choose Flutter? Right? So definitely, there are a lot of benefits using Flutter, and some of them are actually very obvious. One of them is the underlying language of Flutter, which is Dart. So Dart is just an absolute joy to type on or to write in, right? It makes it very, very difficult to make errors, right? And because Dart is statically typed, right? It just makes everything, all your apps, it makes them very, very performant and makes it difficult to actually code errors. That actually released something they call null safety, which actually makes it further difficult to make more errors, right? So unlike some other languages that you can, if you like, you put semicolon. If you like, you don't put semicolon. That is just really incredible. So getting back, why Flutter actually? Flutter, like I mentioned earlier, is actually aligned with the fundamental ethos of Web3. Flutter essentially allows what I call a decentralized front end. You can deploy apps to any platform, Android, iOS, web, and all that. And when you want to develop a decentralized application or a dApp, for example, you actually need something like this so that the experience is not constrained to one particular platform. Flutter also has a large, rich widgets library. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I tried to develop I was kind of building an app in React, and I tried to develop something in React. And that's when I actually started knowing the value of Flutter, to be very, very honest. It was just one widget, I think a tab bar view widget, right, that I wanted to develop in React. And I realized that I had to write a lot of code. I needed to import a lot of things. And I wonder how React devs actually do things like that, to be very honest. In Flutter, you need about 3 to 4 lines of code. In React, you need 3 to 4 lines of imports and, and almost 15 lines of code just to develop something small, right? Flutter has an enormously rich widgets library, which makes it extremely easy to make applications for Android, iOS, right? And in the future, I'm actually looking forward to what I call Metaverse widgets, meaning that, in Flutter, everything is a widget. So as a Flutter dev in the next couple of years, you'll be able to deploy to all platforms and also be able to deploy to the Metaverse, right? That's just incredible if you ask me. You also have that FFI. FFI stands for Foreign Function Interface. So for Web3, there are a lot of things that aren't yet standardized, especially in the mobile development world. But that FFI essentially allows us to interact with Web3 clients through another language and call the functions of that language from that. right? And that essentially means that you can build anything that your imagination pleases. He has an amazing community support. For the years I've been developing Flutter, I haven't encountered a single bug that was impossible to resolve. The community is amazing. It's also backed by Google and some other very amazing people who are constantly building the future of Flutter. So I have a couple of resources. If you're interested in learning about Web3, I'll be sure to share them after. We have some about Web3, Ethereum, Solidity, making a couple of apps with Flutter and integrating it with MetaMask, Flutter and Rust. So I'll be sure to share them after the event. So what are the challenges of using Flutter to develop Web3 applications? If Flutter sounds like a very interesting framework, why are not the companies using Flutter to develop all the applications? Well, in the Web3 space, Flutter is still coming up, but it's not really a Flutter problem. It's sort of a mobile development problem in general, right? So, for example, you have things like the SDKs, Swift SDKs, Kotlin, and all that. They are still developing their Web3 support for Flutter, right? So, I'm sure with time, though, and you also can contribute to Flutter if you feel you can actually contribute something, right? You can contribute to it, make it better, try and make a lot of things work, compatible with Web3. I think currently you can only build Web3 applications with Flutter Web, right? So for mobile and other platforms, you have to struggle a bit to get it right. So I've already talked about how amazing Flutter is. I don't really need to repeat it again. As a Web3 developer that's going to develop the next generation of apps with Flutter, right? You need to be able to see past what is already there, right? So you can contribute to the applications. Flutter is, like I said, Flutter has an amazing widgets library, and in the future, right, it's going to even get better. So actually, what I feel is that it's actually a perfect match, to be very, very honest. And if there are any Flutter developers in this room, you guys already have something. Your skills are very, very valid, unlike some other languages. So I'm going to leave you guys with something. In November of 2021, Ethereum name service, that's ENS, actually airdropped over $500 million worth of ENS into people's accounts, right? I don't know if anyone actually got the airdrop here. Did anyone get? This is a safe space, so okay, no one got, right? Basically, the criteria for airdropping this amount of money into their wallets was essentially that they believed in a decentralized future, right? You guys being here today is a very huge step in actually proving your belief for decentralization. You might have missed this opportunity, but that's the potential of Web3. Web3 is an internet for the users and for people who build the internet. It's a very massive way for us to redistribute wealth from the large companies that used to hold all the value before and distribute it to everybody. Now, it's your time. You would eventually get a lot of these benefits in the future when you start experimenting and exploring Web3 and its technologies. So I think that actually sums up the discussion for today. So thank you very much. You can follow me on Twitter if he actually added some amount of value to you. And I'll see you around.